After my previous trilogy on the A4v2 ITX case, AKLLA offered to send me their latest one, the A4 Pro, to check out. So a huge thanks to AKLLA for this opportunity. The A4 Pro follows the same concept. It is essentially a sub-10 litre sandwich style ITX case with a configurable motherboard frame that allows for different sized GPUs and CPU coolers. This case though sells at a much higher price point compared to the A4v2. So the question is it worth it? In the standard setup for both cases without a top cap, they're pretty much the same size. The A4 Pro comes in at 340mm long, 210mm wide, and 160mm tall. The A4v2 is just 5mm shorter in width and height. The configurable zones for GPU and CPU cooler are only marginally different as well. On the A4 Pro, we have a 51mm 73mm configuration or a 59mm 65mm configuration. The A4v2 supports 50mm 75mm and 58mm 67mm configurations. What this means for people who are looking at the A4 Pro is that they really do have to pay attention to their GPU and CPU cooler pairings. In my PC, I'm using the EVGA RTX 3080 XC3, which comes in under 50mm. The thinner GPU makes it really convenient for me as it gives me the maximum options for CPU coolers. Pairing with an L12S with its height of 70mm should be no problem. However, if you're using a thicker GPU such as the Asus TUF 3080 with its almost 58mm width, then you have to switch over to the other frame configuration, which officially only supports up to 65mm CPU coolers. The L12S does not fit in this configuration. Your best bet would perhaps be the Alpenfen Black Ridge cooler, which comes in at a very low 47mm in height, or 62mm with an additional slim top fan, although you may have some difficulty with motherboard and RAM compatibility. Of course, that's for air coolers. If you're going for water cooling though, that's a whole different story, as the issues then would be less about CPU block, but more about the other components such as the radiator. Support for hard disks is also pretty good. By default, you can do up to 3 2.5-inch hard disks or SSDs. With the included brackets, you can have 2 below the PSU and 1 screwed straight to the frame between the front panel and the PSU. So let's talk about the case quality and perhaps the improvements to the build experience. I think the first thing most people would notice would be the color. The A4 Pro comes in 2 color options, an oxidized white or deep space grey. Initially, I had thought the oxidized word was referring to perhaps the method used to treat the bare metal and to give it its color, but putting the case side by side with the original A4v2, I'm now pretty sure that the color of this case actually is oxidized white. This is definitely not an FF color, but more like a 10% darker E6 color shade. Definitely something to take note of if you were expecting a pure white case. The next thing most people would notice would be the huge change in the thickness of the panels. The panels on the A4 Pro are thick and sturdy. While the A4v2 is by no means flimsy, it lacks that solid metal feel that the A4 Pro has. The case is also definitely heavier, but that heftiness also gives it a strong sense of stability. And while this increased thickness accounts for that marginal change in the overall width and height of the case, it did also slightly change the support for CPU coolers, reducing the max from 75mm or 66mm to 73mm or 65mm. That 1 or 2mm may not seem like a lot, but actually has quite an impact on CPU cooler choices. In terms of material finishing, the A4 Pro is a lot smoother. I believe on the A4v2, the color comes from an electrostatic spray, while the A4 Pro has, if I'm not wrong, an anodized finishing. These new thick panels also feel very cool to the touch. Previously on the A4v2, when the PC was running, the side panels would get a little warm. On the A4 Pro, however, the side panels continue to remain cool, and these thick metal panels possibly help with the overall heat dissipation in the case as well. The motherboard frame is also cut from one of these thick metal panels, also giving it that sturdy feel. Switching the frame position is a lot easier now as well, as you can just remove all the screws holding it in place, compared to the previous nuts used on the A4v2. The new PSU mount was a teeny bit harder to work with though. On the A4v2, I successfully managed to hide most of the cables behind the PSU, but somehow did not manage to achieve that on this one, hence the cables are dangling under the PSU. This means that if I wanted to fit in the same 120mm AIO setup for this case as I did on the A4v2, it would be a lot more difficult to achieve. Another major difference between this case and its predecessor is the quality of the CNC cuts, not just on the panels, but even down to the chamfers on each of these ventilation holes. The way the side panels mount to the main body has changed as well. Previously, the panels would basically latch on with 6 of these knobs. While it worked fine, it did mean that the panels weren't actually fixed in place, and there was always room to push it slightly out of alignment, especially if any one of these knobs were loosened. On the A4 Pro, the panels slide into these grooves very nicely, and the top panel can be screwed down to lock everything into place firmly. I also like the inclusion of the leather pull tabs, so no more DIY ribbon handle like I did previously. The Taobao listing mentions that it comes with 4 different colors, although only red and yellow were included in my review unit. I really like the yellow though. It matches really well with the A4 Pro and goes well with my Switch Lite case as well. One last thing that the A4 Pro has that the A4v2 doesn't is a USB Type-C front panel port. Upgrading to a Gen 2 cable on the Taobao page only costs 69 yuan or about 10 USD, which is pretty affordable. Unfortunately, the cable didn't come with my review unit, but even if it did, my Gigabyte B550i motherboard doesn't actually support the newer USB Type-C headers, so I wouldn't have been able to use it anyway. One thing that I had mixed feelings about was the use of these T6 Allen screws. It is actually really convenient as the accessory box also includes the Allen keys you can use with these new screws, and Allen screws typically have a much lower chance of wearing out compared to crosshead screws, which are a huge pain to remove when that does happen. However, I was slightly disappointed that they were not magnetic, as not having them stick to my screwdriver meant that the risk of a screw falling into a web of power supply cables was a lot higher. Having tried both an air cooler and a 120mm AIO previously, this time round I opted for the Watercooling Top-cap, so I could upgrade to a 240mm AIO for my Ryzen 5900X. With the inclusion of the Watercooling Top-cap, the height of the case goes up by about 5 cm. The A4v2 has a similar option which I didn't pick previously because I really like the low profile look of the standard setup. But now that I have this 240mm AIO, it is really hard to go back. Installed is the EKWB 240mm AIO water cooler, and has been incredible so far. Out of the box, and on the 120 ppt PBO settings that I had my 5900X on previously, there was a whopping 20-degree drop in load temps while running Cinebench. It was almost jaw-dropping. So much headroom for additional tweaking. The final settings for now that I decided to leave my CPU on this time is basically stock PBO limits, no boost override, and the curve optimizer set to a -10 on all cores. With an ambient temperature of 26 degrees Celsius, my CPU was idling at about 39, with a max load of around 68 degrees while running Cinebench. This went a little higher to 72 degrees while playing Cyberpunk, probably because of the additional overall heat in the case, especially from the GPU, and that warm air exhausting through the top radiator. Most importantly, this PC is nearly dead silent even with all the above running, at those very decent temperatures, at aggressively quieter fan curves. And the EKWB AIO's water block pump was completely silent too. The only thing I need now is a quieter air conditioner in my room. So, in closing, is the A4 Pro worth it, and would I recommend it? First up, on the Watercooling Top-cap. If you're using a hot 105W TDP processor, such as the 5900X or the 5950X, I would really recommend you getting the Top-cap and the 240mm AIO. A better cooler really makes a huge difference to these CPUs and allow them to achieve the performance levels they were really designed for. But if you're using something like the 5600X with a much lower 65W TDP, I would probably just stick with the lower profile standard edition case and stick to air cooling. The L12S is by no means a slouch and would perform remarkably with the 5600X. Now between the A4v2 and the A4 Pro, this is a much harder decision to make. The A4v2 is a steal at the price it is currently selling for. The standard edition, including a riser cable and shipping, comes in at about 173 SGD or 130 USD. The A4 Pro, on the other hand, comes in at about 310 SGD or 234 USD with the Ryzen cable and USB Gen 2 cable. For comparison, you can get a Cooler Master NR200P at a local retailer for about 150 Singapore dollars, or ship in a Loki Ghost S1 from Amazon for a total of about 470 Singapore dollars. If you're already looking at shipping in the Ghost S1, then I would highly recommend you to take a look at the AKLLA A4 Pro first. If you don't need the front panel Type-C connector though, I think I would recommend the A4v2. Otherwise, the biggest edge that the A4 Pro has is the premium feeling you get. At the end of the day, it really is about all the little improvements and tiny details that accumulate into the overall quality of the case, and all those little details also account for that price difference. It is a much more polished product with superior build quality. Perhaps the most important question to ask is, what kind of PC are you building? If you're buying an expensive car, you probably wouldn't pair it with cheap tires. Similarly, I like the idea of housing top-end PC components in a top-end case as well. Hence, the variety of PC cases in the market, some aimed at budget builds, some at high-end ones, and it is clear which segment that the A4 Pro is aimed at. If you're looking to get this case, buying it off Taobao may seem intimidating at first, but actually isn't too hard using Chrome and Google Translate. First up, you will need to create an account on Taobao. Taobao typically uses a phone number with SMS verification. Forms are straightforward to fill up with the help of Translate. Search for AKLLA and it should turn up quite a few relevant entries. The main user you should be looking for is Ubin0329. You won't miss it. His would be the most popular AKLLA entries in the list. With Translate on, the options you need to select become clearer as well. Here, I selected the A4 Pro, the Ryzen cable, as well as the USB Gen 2 cable upgrade. This is probably the most important page after you proceed forward from the shopping cart. Taobao has multiple shipping options. The first uses Taobao's own forwarder, Cainiao. The other two seemingly cheaper options actually send your order to a domestic warehouse where you would have to use your own third-party freight service to ship it out of China. Cainiao's shipping pricing is very reasonable actually. Shipping to Singapore only costs about 58 Singapore dollars for the 3 selected items, and we're talking about a rather bulky case with a large shipping volume. Payment checkout on Taobao goes through the Alipay service, which does allow you to use your own credit card. If in doubt, or if Taobao doesn't ship to your address, you can also try services such as SuperBuy, but you would probably need to pay additional agent fees as well. That's all for today's video on the AKLLA A4 Pro. If you're interested in the A4v2, I'll link the previous videos down below. If you have any questions or feedback, do leave a comment below as well. And do hit that like and subscribe button, as I have more videos coming up, including an update to my wireless keyboard setup. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.